If you asked most people what keeps a log house standing for 300 years, they'd probably say it comes down to the quality of timber. But ask an old Finnish builder, and the answer would be the word kirvesmies. That's Finnish for a traditional house-building carpenter, and translated literally, it means axeman. Someone who made furniture wasn't called the same thing. He was a puseppä, a woodsmith. Those two names say something about how Finland came to see wood. Building a house was about understanding a living material so completely it could shelter generations, and that understanding is now rooted into the language. So why and how did this come to be? Well, the legendary architect Juhani Pallasmaa once put it simply: in old Finland, the whole of life was wood. Homes, boats, tools, sleds, fences, even children's toys came out of the forest. When your whole world depends on one material, you start treating it like a lifelong companion. But none of this is surprising. The vast majority of civilizations have used wood for housing and, well, just about anything. But when the time came, as concrete and steel began reshaping the rest of Europe's cities, Finland quietly held on to its wooden homes. What did Finns know about log houses that made them stick with this traditional way of building and kept these houses standing for so long? The truth is, there's more to it than one video can cover. But 5 things matter most. Firstly, it's about the wood itself, but not in the way you expect. Way before a single log goes up, there's the tree. To most of us, one pine looks pretty much like the next. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. But Finnish builders prized mature, slow-grown trees with tight growth rings and a high proportion of durable heartwood. And those look a bit different. See, master builders looked specifically for trees exposed to harsh northern winds, the ones that face north, which causes the trunk to grow more slowly, producing compressed, hyper-dense wood fibers. By marking this side, the builder ensured that when the log was laid into the wall, its hardened northern face would be the one confronting the outside elements. Selecting the right tree could mean the difference between a wall that decayed and one that survived for generations. But waiting a century for a tree to mature only makes sense if you're confident your family will still hold the land when it's ready to cut, and that's the second thing. But it's more complex than you'd imagine. You see, the family that chose the tree was almost always the same family that would one day live under its roof. Much of Finland's productive forest land belonged to private families, and that pattern hasn't gone away. Families still own around 60% of Finland's productive forest land today, spread across roughly 350,000 separate holdings, owned by some 600,000 people, and about half those plots were inherited, not bought. That's a 100-year bet placed on a single tree, and even then, they weren't ready to cut it. What were they waiting for? You see, an experienced axeman waited for winter because, believe it or not, it solved several problems at once. Sap is the liquid that flows through a tree, doing the jobs that keep it alive, pulling water up from the roots, carrying sugars to feed new growth, and building new bark, leaves, and rings. That activity peaks in spring and summer when the tree is growing fastest. In winter, it drops way down as the tree goes dormant, making its internal plumbing slow to a near stop. With less moisture moving through the wood, insect and fungal activity was greatly reduced, and heavy logs could be dragged across snow and on frozen ground instead of sinking into mud. Even the forest suffered less, since the frozen ground protected nearby roots. Winter was part of the process, and horses would haul the felled trunk across the ice toward the spot where a home would eventually rise. But not so fast. Before those logs went anywhere, the Finns were picky about one thing: the tool doing the cutting. And you already guessed it, the axe. Most of us think of it as a rough tool for splitting firewood, something a saw eventually made obsolete. Finnish builders saw it differently. To them, the axe was what actually shaped the house: trimming beams, carving joints, and flattening surfaces. A skilled axeman could shape remarkably straight timber with nothing but experience and a sharp blade. There was another advantage too. A smooth surface shed water better than a rough one. The builders couldn't explain why at that time, of course, but experience had taught them it worked. That hand-shaped precision carried over into the fourth thing: how the logs fit together too. Every tree grows a little differently, so each log had to be shaped to match the exact curves of the log beneath it, meaning no two joints were the same. To do this, the master builders used a metal tool called a vara, kind of like a compass, to trace the shape of the bottom log onto the log going on top of it. Then they carved out a long groove along that line by hand. That groove did two jobs. It locked the logs together in an airtight seal, and its curved shape directed rainwater away from the seams so it wouldn't rot. The end result fit so well that the seams almost disappeared, so the house looked like it had grown that way naturally, rather than been built. That same care carried over to how the walls held together with few, if any, iron nails. The weight of the logs, together with carefully carved corner joints and wooden pegs, did the work instead. Even after the roof went on, the house wasn't considered fully settled. Builders expected the logs to keep tightening as the timber adjusted over the following months and years. Imagine handing someone the keys and telling them, "Give it a winter, it'll get even better." That's genuinely what Finnish builders expected. And as well as we know now, a house does need time to settle. Oh, but the Finns weren't done yet. All those years of studying wood taught them more than just when to cut it. It taught them how to build with it. And that brings us to perhaps the most overlooked detail of all, the fifth one. You see, if you pulled apart the wall of a traditional Finnish log house, hunting for some clever piece of engineering, you probably wouldn't notice anything at first. It would just look like moss. Soft, green forest moss. Hardly what you'd expect to protect a home through brutal winters, but that's what makes it interesting. Long before synthetic insulation existed, Finnish builders packed forest moss tightly into that hollowed-out vara groove. Its fibrous structure filled irregular gaps, retained some resilience, and compressed as the walls settled, helping to keep cold air from sneaking through. Bit by bit, the house became tighter as the logs and moss adjusted together. The same instinct showed up overhead. Most people picture old wooden roofs covered in shingles, but for centuries, the waterproof layer here is birch bark, laid down in overlapping sheets and held in place with timber poles. And it worked for a simple reason. Birch bark contains a natural compound called betulin, the same thing that gives the tree its white color. Betulin repels water and fights off rot and fungus on its own. Layered under the roof timbers, a well-built birch bark roof could protect a farmhouse for decades, and in the right conditions, close to a century, without a drop of synthetic sealant. This exact thinking went into the foundation too. Builders knew moisture rising from the soil could rot the timber, so the logs were raised off the ground and put on stones. And to prevent cold air and damp from creeping in underneath, they packed the gaps with a mix of dry clay, wood shavings, and crushed charcoal, because charcoal soaks up moisture and clay blocks the cold. Nothing was wasted. Choose the right tree, wait for winter, shape it by axe, cut the joints by hand, and pack every gap with moss, bark, clay, and charcoal. 5 answers to 5 problems stacked on top of each other until you had a house that could outlive everyone who built it. A good example is the Quensel house in Turku, built around 1700, thought to be the oldest wooden house still standing in the city. It's over 300 years old and still standing in its original form. Hirsi Talo-Teollisuus, the Finnish Log House Industry Federation, estimates a well-built log house today could last even longer than that, potentially up to 500 years. This is what separates traditional Finnish engineering from the rest of the world. Most modern construction builds the opposite way. Concrete and steel, designed to resist nature and fight time rather than sit inside it. Land turns over every few years, timber gets grown fast and harvested faster, and houses get financed on 30-year terms because nobody really expects to still be there in 100. This foresight is most obvious at the very end of a building's life. When a modern concrete or steel structure outlives its purpose, it's demolished into heaps of toxic, non-recyclable waste that clogs landfills for centuries. A traditional Finnish log house has a genuinely circular afterlife. Assembled without iron nails or synthetic adhesives, the whole structure can be carefully unstacked like building blocks. The timber can be moved to a new site, downsized into a cottage or a lakeside sauna, or reused as structural beams. And if a log finally reaches the end of its structural life after several centuries, it can simply be left on the forest floor to decompose, returning its stored carbon back into the soil that grew it. By the early 20th century, Europe went rigid and turned to concrete, steel, and mass production. Finland watched and refused to let go of wood, so instead, it evolved it. Hand tools became machines. Forests were managed more scientifically, and factories began cutting timber with precision, but the underlying philosophy barely changed. Today, a modern Finnish timber house often begins inside a factory. Walls, floors, and roof sections manufactured to exact measurements, sometimes arriving with insulation, windows, even wiring already in place, then assembled on site in a matter of days. It looks worlds apart from an axeman shaping logs by hand, but the tree is still doing most of the work. And wood remains the primary structural material, which is exactly how Finland built one of Europe's most advanced prefabricated timber housing industries, by applying generations of accumulated knowledge to modern manufacturing. Traditions mixed with modern economics, which many countries struggle with. So did it work? Are Finns actually still choosing wood? Well, nearly 90% of new detached homes in Finland are still built from wood, even though concrete and steel are used plenty in cities, bridges, and infrastructure. Timber still feels natural, and the industry knows it inside out. Finland's forests are also intensively managed, with annual tree growth generally outpacing the volume harvested. However, it turns out those carefully managed forests were holding on to more than just wood. They were holding on to answers the rest of the world was only starting to catch up to. Over the last few decades, engineers have essentially rediscovered what Finnish builders already knew from experience: timber's strength-to-weight ratio, its insulating properties, its renewability, and its ability to store carbon for the life of a building. That knowledge fed into cross-laminated timber, developed in Austria and Germany in the early 1990s, where layers of wood are glued together at right angles to make it as strong and stable as concrete or steel. Finland put the method to serious use, starting with Fukuoka, an 8-story wooden apartment block in Jyväskylä, completed in 2015. Timber built this way is naturally fire-resistant. When wood burns, it chars on the outside, and that char shields the wood underneath, slowing the fire instead of feeding it. It's also a natural insulator, holding on to heat in winter and staying cool in summer without burning through as much energy. And every tree used to build with it keeps the carbon it absorbed while growing locked away inside the walls, sometimes for generations, instead of releasing it back into the air. But Finland was not the only one with a love affair for traditional building. Japan spent centuries mastering its own wooden construction, raising temples and pagodas that survived earthquakes, wars, and the passage of time, and unlike the Finnish, came dangerously close to losing that knowledge for good. Click on the video on the screen to learn more.